There was once a philosopher guy a couple hundred years ago named Descartes. He came up with a problem that was unsolvable then, and it is unsolvable now. The problem was, how do we know that the reality that we perceive around us is real, or whether it's just a hallucination? His problem was that suppose our consciousness was captured by a demon, and this demon keeps feeding you hallucinations. One of the most influential science books of the past 100 years or so is The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. He showed through very careful writing how all animals are driven by very selfish genes that don't care anything at all about other animals. But it only seems otherwise because the only stable societies are societies filled with animals surrounded by other animals with similarly selfish genes. They figured this out back in the 70s with very basic computer algorithms. They kept trying different kinds of survival strategies, and they would let them run for several generations to see which ones would create the most stable societies. The observable behavior that caused this question to come up was why animals don't fight their own kind to the death. Lions, for example, are very capable killers, but when lions fight other lions, they never fight to the death. The first two basic strategies they tried out in this natural selection simulation software was all hawks and all doves. All hawks meant that they would fight with each other to the death all the time. All doves meant they would never fight with one another under any circumstances. Neither of these simple strategies would lead to a stable society, and they would eventually become extinct. Computer modeling has come a long ways since then. Ideally, in a couple of decades, they might be able to use computer modeling for much more complex problems. For example, once they have the human genome all figured out, they'll be able to use computer modeling as a first step in drug trials, for example. And maybe in 100 years or so, when computers are much more powerful than they are now, and we have a much more robust idea about human nature, they'll be able to model entire societies. For example, they could test out different economic models on computer-generated societies to see which ones would work out the best. One of the strange things about our brains and the world around us is how limited our senses are. Our eyes can only detect a small fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum. Our ears can only detect a small fraction of the auditory spectrum. Our memories of events is very sketchy and vague. Physicists tell us that we can only detect about 10% of the matter in the entire universe. The rest is called dark energy and dark matter. But it's often confused as being out there, since they talk about it being out in the universe, when in reality it's all around us. Which means that when we look around us, the reality that we perceive is really only 10% of all the possible matter that exists. Which means it's possible that there could be 10 different parallel realities all coexisting and all made up of different types of matter and energy. The very simple answer to the selfish gene problem was tit for tat, which means all animals are programmed with a very selfish, very simple strategy that only makes it look like there's some kind of a group selection going on. If you're a tiger and another tiger attacks you, you attack it back. But if the other tiger backs down, then you back down. This is where the idea of tit for tat comes from. Suppose that in a couple hundred years, they have powerful enough computers and advanced enough software systems to simulate entire societies. And suppose they realize that one important component would be to give each simulated human in that simulated society a computer-generated self-awareness. They can't do that now, but it's absolutely conceivable that they would be able to do this in the future, which means that in the future we might have the same problem that Descartes had in the past, which means how do we know that our reality is real or whether it's just a computer simulation? The computer-generated people of the future would believe that their reality is real, which means that Descartes' problem is still unsolved. His answer back then, which may be the answer of the future, which also may be the answer right now. The only thing that we can be certain of is that we exist, which means that you looking at me and listening to me right now could be a hallucination, that I might not exist, that I am just part of something that you are hallucinating, which begs the question, if you are hallucinating now, why are you hallucinating a weird guy like me? Why not hallucinate yourself something much more enjoyable, like a bunch of porn stars?